Hey Sandesh, how are you?
Oh, hey Huck. Oh, good. How are you?
I'm good. All right. Well, let's jump in, I guess.
Sure. I did like little summaries for the first 10 chapters or 10 paragraphs, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think probably it's better to do a whole chapter, just because it's not that
A whole
much.
essay, you mean?
Whole
Whole
essay.
essay? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if it were like a grad level seminar in philosophy, you'd probably read this book in a week.
Yeah.
So it's probably a good idea to plow through a little bit more. Also, just because the style is not so hard to get through. Doesn't mean
Oh, yeah.
it doesn't mean that there's not a lot going on in the arguments, but
No, I mean, I read it twice. I
oh,
read the first and twice through, so it took a little longer.
okay.
Yeah.
Uh, one of the reasons I say that, well, it's good that you read it at least, because I think that the most interesting stuff comes around section 13.
Oh, really? Okay.
So we can spend some time talking about that. But next time we meet, I would like to maybe jump into the second essay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, go for it.
Okay, so maybe just start with section by section.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um,
Or you could also maybe doing section by section would be good, but maybe a few kind
mhm.
of high level uh, characterizations of what's going on would be good too.
Yeah. Um, I think the first thing, well, after the first, yeah, the reason I wanted to read it twice is because I think the first time I read it, it was as though I was kind of like misunderstanding Nietzsche because I a lot of the times thought that he was kind of putting his own value system
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the things he was saying. And then when I read it the second time through, it was a little more clear that it was just more like he's doing an observation or like some sort of a
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right. So the
um,
question is, how much here is evaluative in the argument, and how much of it is descriptive? Right.
right.
Is he describing what he takes to be just a sort of natural phenomenon? Homo sapiens evolved in a certain way. Once they acquired culture, then certain ideas about morality arise in a certain way, and so on. And it's just a description, a theory that one couldn't really test necessarily scientifically, because it's a sort of I mean, it takes the form of a history, but it's actually something more like a myth or some kind of um, archetypal story than a
Mhm.
specific history where you would really look for archaeological evidence or that kind of thing. Although he does speak in a way that makes it seem like he's often talking about specific historical events.
Yeah.
Uh, but it doesn't take long reading through it to realize that he gives characterizations of certain actors, certain, either people or groups of people that uh, are they share the same name as specific historical people or events or whatever, but he's treating them more as archetypes
Mhm.
in a way. And the way you know that he's treating them as archetypes is because the more you think about the sort of surface level of what he's saying, the less it holds up.
Yeah.
Because it's not hard to think of all sorts of counterexamples or nuances or interpretive uh, objections or that kind of thing. Um, so that's to describe kind of what the method is. That it
Mhm.
is one, it's descriptive,
Yeah.
although he writes in such a way, especially when he's not being careful, that makes it sound like he's endorsing a particular
Right.
viewpoint, which
Yeah.
maybe he is. I mean, because there is
Yeah.
this idea of value being really just an expression of how you choose to spend your time.
Yeah.
And he's choosing to spend his time in a polemical critique of Christian morality or whatever. So just by virtue of the fact that he's doing that seems to suggest on his terms that he's valuing a particular side of the equation.
Right.
But at the same time, I think it's important to understand that there isn't anywhere, so if you really do read it literally, though, you'll see that he never literally endorses a point of view.
No.
Right. And so
Yeah.
There's some question about, is his evaluation just suppressed, or is it that he's really just giving us a descriptive theory that is not intended to be a normative theory about how things should be? Yeah. I would say it's ambiguous. I mean, it's not, a lot of Nietzsche apologists go straight for, look, Nietzsche is totally compatible with, well, actually, nobody would say that Nietzsche is totally compatible with things like democracy and institutionalized equality and that kind of thing. Nobody would say that, but most people would say that Nietzsche is totally compatible with sort of, freedom-loving Western values and that kind of thing. And I think that that is not totally true. I think that it's more ambiguous than that. One way of saying it is like this. It is true, for instance, let's get into like Nazis and stuff. It is true that the Nazis distorted Nietzsche's writing and his theories and his worldviews. But at the same time, what Nietzsche was doing was close enough to that parody, the Nazi parody, that he's not totally innocent either.
Yeah.
Because if it were really something that were just totally anathema to Nazi ideology, I don't think the Nazis would ever have gravitated towards it, So it's true that what he's doing is quite complex and quite nuanced and sophisticated, and has many different shades, and there are different ways of looking at it and so on. But at the same time, it's not totally incompatible with the way it was appropriated.
Right. Yes, a lot of the places where he uses quotation marks for like the good or and so on and so forth, like he does it, and then a lot of times he doesn't. He'll just say this is good and won't be under a quotation mark.
Yeah, there you always have to look at the sentence and the context. If you have a specific point to look at, a specific example, then it might be useful to look at, because sometimes he will put things in quotation marks without using quotation marks, but by putting the word in a sentence that suggests that it is mention and not use. I don't know if that's a standard in analytic philosophy when you talk about a word. Putting it in quotation marks means you're mentioning the word. In other words, you're talking about it as a word, as people use it, that is usually associated with a certain meaning.
Okay.
That's mentioning the word, but using the word means you're actually using it as part of your own speech.
Right.
And you can mention a word without putting it in quotation marks. For instance, I don't know, like if I say Sandesh said the word, said a bad word or whatever. I'm not actually using the word. I'm talking about how you use the word, but I'm also not exactly talking about how you use the word. I'm simply saying that you made reference to this word. Right. But I haven't put anything in quotation marks. Right? I sort of have, because I'm talking about what you said. But in any case, you have to really look at the context. Okay, but let's maybe just say a few words, hopefully mostly from you, that give a kind of high-level introduction or characterization of what's going on.
So I guess a lot of like the argument kind of stems from him trying to figure out what the motto of these English psychologists what their motto is, and of course he's like not completely against them. He thinks, he likes to at least believe that like their intention is it's like well intended, and they're putting their, what I forget what he says, like something like their own suffering to discover, like in line to discover like the truth, whatever. But and he's got, of course he's got like problems with like their methodology, and a lot of it has to do with like this lack of history in the methodology to discover the origin of good.
Mhm.
And I guess he's like really interested in like the origin, because I guess like a lot of English, like the writings, they he thinks they made this error, which is something, what was it? It was like the order was like utility, habit, and forgetting, or something like that. Utility, forgetting, habit, and then error. Basically, he's saying like, they think like at some point we attached doing something useful, or like doing something unegoistic action, doing something good to someone else, or something useful to someone else gets tied into being something good, and
Yeah.
then
Okay. Well, it does sound like we're kind of already into a section by section summary, and I would like to spend a little bit more time just at a kind of high level characterization of the method that he's bringing here, right? Okay. So like one way to get at that would be to ask, well, what is the method? I've already described it as sort of like an archetypal history, which means it's not a literal sort of archaeological or evidence-based history. It's archetypal in the sense that it's a kind of historicized myth. Okay, so that's one part of it. But another way to get at it, and maybe this is a place that you can contribute, is how much of his analysis is a logical analysis of morality. And remember, so the way philosophers would talk about it is that this is a critique of Kant's morality. Now, of course, he only brings up Kant once in the essay. And actually, when he's doing that, it's not even about Kant's morality. It's about his epistemology and the thing in itself and so on. But, the elephant in the room here is that it's a critique of the Kantian theory of morality. Well, what's the most characteristic word to describe the Kantian aesthetic, or the Kantian theory of morality? It's logical. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, how much of this theory of the origin of morality is logical? And I guess the word origin already sort of, it kind of gives the answer away a little bit, I guess, or it is true that he's interested in the origin of morality. Talking about origins would be a sort of, it's not exactly a weird way to talk about Kantian morality, but Kant's not really interested in the origin of morality. He's interested in the logical structure of morality.
Yeah.
Right? So there's something interesting. The idea that logic and history are in tension with each other.
Are in contention, or
are in tension with each other. Logic and history are in tension with each other. Why would that be the case? Why should logic and history be in tension?
Well, I guess like a logical structure, if you're thinking of something using logic, it's like, okay, there's, let's say, some sort of an A, and from A you get B, and it's like very clearly, and there's a very linear direction for like the events and so on and so forth. And I guess when we look at history, we look at it that way, in like a linear way, where A happened, and then logically like that led to B, and so on and so forth.
Well, what you're describing sounds like a similarity between logic and history, not a tension.
Yeah. Oh, so when you say intention, it's not a marrying
they
of the two?
conflict with each other. There's a
Oh,
conflict
it's a
between
conflict.
logic and history.
I see. Okay.
And so
Yeah.
why would I say that? That's fairly common idea, right? That there is a tension between a historical analysis of anything, in this case, a historical analysis of morality versus a logical analysis of morality. What's the conflict?
I'm not sure. Does it? Well, yeah.
You know Aristotle's three laws of logic? We've talked about them. I've mentioned them many times. They come up all the time. But do you remember the three laws of logic?
No, no, not really.
Okay, there's the law of identity. What's the law of identity?
1 = 1.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so A equals A at the same time in the same respect, A equals A. Okay, there's the law of non-contradiction. It's either A or not A. Right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and there's the, or let's see. Actually, what the law of non-contradiction is strictly is not A and not A. If I share my screen, I'll just it's a little bit saying it like that is a little bit confusing. The law of non-contradiction is it is not the case that A and non-A, right? So in other words, you can't have both A and non-A. That's the law of non-contradiction. The law of excluded middle is the third one, which is A or non-A, but you can't have anything in between. So A equals A, identity. A or not A, but not neither. It has to be one or the other, and not both. Those are the three laws of logic, according to Aristotle. Okay. When did those start being true?
Just like
I guess I didn't need to share my screen after all.
Yeah.
When did those laws of logic start being true?
Well, I guess when math was invented, or
Well,
or
it's a trick question. Hopefully your brain's starting to explode because
yeah,
that question doesn't compute.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense to say when did that start being true if you think that these things are just irreducible aspects of the structure of logic. There is no starting point to it exactly. It's
right.
Even if no matter existed in all of the universe, actually, if you look at many theories of time, contemporary theories of time from physics, there's an idea that if no matter exists, there is no time. Because there's just empty space. There's nothing to organize the relationships that are a necessary condition for time to even have any sense. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
But regardless, even if there were nothing, no matter, nothing at all, the law of identity would still be true. Well, okay, so that's the idea that it's the sort of thing that you can't even possibly deny, according to Aristotle, because if you deny that the law of identity is true, if you say the law of identity is false, well, you're already saying that the law of identity is in force because you're denying the law of identity.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so it's this sort of idea that there's a sort of eternal structure to logic. Right. There is no starting point. But also, because of that, perhaps, the law of identity was just as true before time began and will be just as true at any point in history. Logical structures are independent of the change of history.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the conflict between logic and history. So if you're giving a logical analysis of something, what you're saying is it really doesn't matter historically what happened. This is the structure. It's a timeless structure. It's eternal. There is no beginning to it. Now, we might use words to describe the structure, and those words may have arisen at a certain point, but the structure itself is independent of the words.
I see. Yeah.
And the structure, because it is a logical structure, is timeless. There is no history to it. History is just sort of a irrelevant byproduct, or not a byproduct. It's an irrelevant thing that you might place on top of the logical structure to describe it. But the logical structure itself is timeless and independent of history.
That makes sense.
Can you turn your computer a little bit? Because there's like all the, you look really angelic. That's all. Okay. So what Kant is trying to show, by virtue of the fact that it's a logical analysis of morality, is that there is something to morality that is independent of historical change, that's independent of time. And it had better be independent of time, because his whole project is to show that time is only something that we impose on reality. Right? If you remember that. Well, then that means if time isn't true reality, but the structure, the logical structure of morality is something that we can have some sort of access to, and in having access to it, we're actually accessing true reality, the noumenal. But if time isn't part of the noumenal, then history is also not part of the noumenal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That morality is timeless, eternal. You know, it's something that comes out of our relationship to the divine and so on, right? Okay, so then comes the question for what Nietzsche's doing. How much of what he's doing is logical? How much of it is historical? Should be clear that it's this weird sort of history. It's like mythic history or something, but that really what he's trying to do is show that there's a process of evolution. That there is no sort of true original logical structure to morality. It's just that certain animals evolved in a certain way and started using language in a certain way. And that language maybe originally arises as, you know, like a tool, a way of interacting with the environment that's advantageous for evolution or whatever. But then this particular species, Homo sapiens, then confuses the structure of language for these timeless logical structures. Right? Well, okay, so one of the things that's going on here is what kind of history outside of the sort of mythic history that he's giving. There's also another way to describe the history, which is etymology. He's talking about the use of words, how people use words differently at different periods. So there are a lot of kind of suppressed premises here, right, as regards the relationship of language and concepts, language and truth. How would you, given what you've read and what Nietzsche's doing here, what do you think he would say about the relationship between language and concepts? And think about that for a second. I'm going to turn off my heater.
Okay.
Yeah. What's the relationship between language and concepts? We might think also to talk about it first from the point of view of Kant. What would Kant say about the relationship of language and concepts?
I don't remember. Was this in? I'm not sure I read about language as much.
Yeah, well, it's a good point, because actually Kant doesn't talk about language. He has all sorts of assumptions about language. And I think that the fact that he doesn't talk about language is evidence for a particular way of construing what he thinks the relationship between language and concepts must be. What does he think about when he talks about a concept such as beauty or whatever?
Right.
beauty is a weird thing because the aesthetic experience is conceptless, but you know,
Right,
it talks
right, right.
about a concept like whatever, you know, the various concepts that are produced by the understanding working on experience and so on. So the concept
Mhm,
human or whatever, you know.
mhm, mhm.
What does he think about the relationship of the word human to the concept human? I mean, you have to reconstruct it because he doesn't specifically talk about language, but what is implied by the fact that he doesn't talk about language?
That there's no direct relationship. Like when you use a, well, language doesn't give you access to the thing in itself.
Well, yeah, that's probably true. Concepts don't either, but we're not worried about the thing in itself. We're just worried
Mm.
about the relationship between concepts and the words that we use for concepts. One way to get it, what I'm asking is, what is logically prior, concepts or language? Concepts are the words for the concepts.
Concepts
Yeah,
are, yeah,
concepts are there.
there.
We use words to point to the concepts or to,
Right.
you know, sort of traffic with the concepts when we're talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Concept is first, language comes to as just sort of a signpost. Like there's me and then there's my name, and you use my name to say, hey, you, that person over there. But I'm the thing that is primary, right? I'm
Right.
prior. Okay.
Yeah.
And then so um
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of how to ask this question so you can put it together yourself without just saying it. But okay, so if concepts are logically prior to word,
Yeah.
how much I guess how important are the words?
Hmm.
And another way of saying that, I can't think of how to ask this question and not just like say, but I suppose how much are the concepts influenced by the words?
Oh, I don't think there's. I don't think the concept is, gets influenced by the words.
Right, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, people might use the wrong word or
Right.
just be sort of confused about a concept. But if you have a really, you know, proper analysis, the concept comes first, and words are like this kind of transparent sign. You
Yeah.
know, it's not that they add anything to the concept, unless we're confused or thinking poetically or metaphorically or something like that. But if we're thinking logically, the concept comes first. The words are just a kind of impartial, transparent medium that we use to access the words, and it
Yeah.
doesn't add anything to the concept.
Right.
So, you know, that's a characterization of what later has come to be called ideal language theory
Uh-huh.
or ideal language philosophy. It's this idea that there's a logical structure in language that you can access as long as you analyze the structures of a sentence correctly, try to get rid of all the ambiguity in the way that words are used and so on.
Mm.
And that there is this sort of original logical structure to how people use language
Mm.
that is independent and um, not a result or not an effect of the use of language.
Uh, oh,
Right.
I see.
So that's
Mm.
yeah. I mean, that's a pretty. It's not a really strange idea. I mean, it's this.
Mm.
When I ask you, you say something. I say, "What do you mean?" And then you say, "It's like I don't know." Let's say you say, "I want to write a really good piece," and then I say, "Well, what do you mean by good? What do you mean by piece?" And then you say, "Oh, well, I mean blah 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 blah. I mean blah 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 blah." What I'm trying to do is get you to focus on a particular specific meaning of each word,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then on top of that, there will be some sort of logical structure. It's like I want to write a really good piece. Let's see.
Mm.
I want to write a really good piece of music, um, but I only want to use lights or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that sounds
Mm-hmm.
kind of cool. But then I would say, well, you probably don't understand what music is then if you're
Mm.
only using lights, right, or something
Yeah.
like that. maybe that's a bad example because music is a weird thing, but like, I want to eat a hot dog, but I don't want to use my mouth
Yeah.
or something. It's like, okay, yeah, well, maybe that's possible too, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, then I would think, well, you're probably confused about either what a hot dog is, what eating is, the relationships between mouths and eating,
Yeah.
um, what is, and I could reduce that to some sort of logical analysis, like for instance, a necessary condition of eating is the passageway through the mouth.
Mm.
And you say, I want to have X without its necessary condition. And then I say, well, that's impossible. You don't understand the logical structure.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's ideal language theory. And that's quite, even though Kant doesn't talk about language, the fact that he doesn't talk about language is itself evidence for this point of view, because he just thinks that language is transparent. It's not worthy of spending any time talking about.
Yeah.
Because what is important are the concepts, and those are logical, and the language is just this sort of impartial medium to get to it, as long as you are using it in a way that is serious, not poetical, not metaphoric, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And not confused about what you mean.
Yeah.
Compared to Nietzsche's theory of language here.
Right. Oh,
What's the
I think
relationship between concepts and language for Nietzsche?
I think he thinks language has had a pretty significant role in like how our concepts have gotten morphed over time.
Yeah.
And that way, I guess it's sort of opposite to Kant, where Kant doesn't spend too much time, like just spoke about language, but Nietzsche spends quite a bit of time talking about like the origin of certain words and how initially a lot of these words were, let's say, for example, like power or something, or like
Or just good and bad.
good and bad, yeah, or nobility or something like that. It had a very like a singular meaning to it. Like someone who was noble was just like richer and was like belonged to a higher class, and it just stopped at that. But over time, these words started getting attached to maybe something like more well-rounded. Someone who's noble is like maybe more spiritual or this or that, and start getting like character traits started getting injected into these words.
Yeah. Well, in other words, the concepts arise out of one activity.
Right.
Right. So what sort of activity? Well, I'm getting a lot of pleasure out of exerting my will, winning all the time or whatever. That's the activity. Another sort of activity I'm capable of is talking.
Yeah.
And so I use my talking ability to refer to my other sort of activity, in the world, fighting, killing, doing whatever I want. I call that good. And then from that, there's a sort of concept, but the concept arises out of activity, right? It's something that we're already doing in the world, and then we sort of piece that together into some sort of concept. I would say if you were going to be really strict about Nietzsche's analysis, this is one of the ways where you see that it's kind of archetypal and it doesn't really hold up, and so then you have to interpret it in different ways. But this is actually a little bit complicated because we have to get to section 13 to describe it, but I'll give you a sort of foreshadowing. It would seem that to be like really strictly speaking, a master or a noble that is just interested in exerting their interests in the world, they wouldn't even have concepts.
Yeah.
And there's a specific reason in Nietzsche's analysis for why it is that there's a certain element of the transvaluation of values already there in the idea that the masters are creating meanings in their words, calling something good or bad or whatever as a concept for their own activity. Maybe we should go straight to section 13 because that's like a huge crux of it. Although it might be good to go section by section, not spend too much time into section 13. But it basically what I'm saying is it has something to do. This is part of what Nietzsche is arguing is that, so remember, before, one of the things I said is that Nietzsche thinks that, one, concepts arise out of activity, language, and so on, and that morality and certain ideas about the structure of the world come out of a confusion about the structure of our language.
Mm-hmm.
So Nietzsche thinks that it just so happens that this particular subspecies of Homo sapiens that lived in the Eurasian landmass, the Proto-Indo-Europeans, whatever, have a certain grammatical construction in their language
Mm-hmm.
that has to do, it's basically the subject predicate construction.
Mm-hmm.
We'll spend a little bit more time talking about that. But what he thinks is that that's just a sort of arbitrary quirk of nature, random quirk of nature, that this species, subspecies perhaps, started, one, talking, and two, talking about the world in such a way that exemplifies a grammatical structure that has no metaphysical meaning, no value whatsoever. It's just the structure of how this particular species is referring to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then what he thinks is that that structure gets mistaken for something metaphysical.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular argument that he makes, if you follow the logic of it, it means that any sort of concept formation must already be a sort of mistaken metaphysical interpretation of that grammatical structure, which means that even the nobles or the masters or whatever are making that same sort of move. So it's not just that the slaves are making this transformational move, but it's already sort of there in what the masters are doing. And what that will end up meaning when we get to the end of this is that it's not like there are two opposing sides.
Yeah.
So that you have like masters, strength, if you think about, like, okay, there's masters, slaves, and the attributes of the masters are, I don't know, strength, they're active, creative, and that the slaves are, weak, reactive, uncreative, something like that. Turns out that both sides can be described with the adjectives that on the first reading, the sort of naive reading, is usually ascribed to each other. So like, actually, it turns out that the slaves are pretty strong, because when you look around in Europe and America, slave morality has won the day.
Yeah.
But also slave morality is creative. It's this creative move of transvaluing the values of the masters, and the masters are actually pretty dumb. But the point is that this stark dichotomy between strength and weakness, creativity, I guess, non-creativity, or being active versus reactive, it starts to sort of meld into all these different possible flavors. And basically what he ends up saying in the very last section, I think it's the very last section, is that the most important aspect, what made culture sort of high culture, what made human beings interesting, was not the master morality, certainly not the slave morality taken to its extreme. What's interesting is the fight between these things. He talks about that. There are a couple sentences about that in the end. But one of the things here is this idea that the mistaking of grammar for metaphysics is already there in what the masters are doing. So the masters are also sort of reactive in their own way. The slaves are also active in their own way.
Right.
And I think that it's actually very much like what he's arguing in The Birth of Tragedy, that what makes great tragedy great is not that it's full-on Dionysian, not that it's full-on Apollonian, but it's this productive battle between them.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing here.
Yeah.
This sort of productive tension that he thinks is
right.
what makes human life interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So that's pretty good high-level summary. So
yeah.
You want to say anything from the summary that you put together of the first 10?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to talking about how the noble are active, and well, I guess he kind of like first says like, prehistoric man was like kind of uncouth, and just like a lot of their actions were like unsymbolical,
Hmm.
and they just like did stuff.
Yeah.
And then traversing forward to like the nobility and stuff, that like they, yeah, it's kind of interesting because like he says like they didn't delve on the enemy, they just um just like did things, and also kind of considered like the lower classes in like, with some sort of pity, or there was like consideration, and there was no like direct like hatred or anything like
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So basically, what you're pointing out is that when you have the opposite of good being bad versus
Hmm.
evil, uh, what you might say is that that is, even though it seems like these are values, good, bad, just like good and evil are also evaluations. Actually, what Nietzsche is really saying is that good and bad is descriptive and not evaluative.
Hmm.
In other words, good means you can do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Bad means you're unable to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
But that's just totally descriptive. That's just a state of affairs. It's not
Right.
that there's anything, certainly there's no moral evaluation. It
Yeah.
might be sort of weakly evaluative if you are associating some kind of pleasure with goodness or whatever, but it's pretty weak evaluation. It's really just uh, sort of descriptive um, analysis where it's like, okay, so good just means powerful or able to do what you want.
Hmm.
And you could analyze the animal kingdom in that way, that
Yeah.
lions are able to do what they want, lambs are not able to do
Yeah.
what they want,
Yeah.
or at least they usually are at the whim of lions or whatever. He talks about birds of
Hmm.
prey and so on, right? But
Hmm.
that is just sort of a state of affairs.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when it gets turned into good versus evil, then it becomes evaluative, and even more than that, morally evaluative.
Yeah. 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 I was trying to think of
Yeah.
just like, um, a scenario where, maybe back when, like, let's say there was some like group of people who were just like physically taller, stronger, and just had more strength,
Mhm.
and there were these other group who were like not as strong, um and that maybe, yeah, I was just trying to imagine a scenario where like the better ones were just like, hey, we are just stronger and bigger, and that's why we get to do more or whatever, and it's just like understood that this is just a given, and I was just trying to think like how the weaker people just accepted that, yeah, okay, this is just the state of affairs without attaching any further like symbolic meaning to
Yeah.
the condition. um and I mean, it's not that hard to imagine it, I guess.
Oh, well, there are lots of historical examples, actually.
Yeah.
The only problem is that in most historical examples, we don't have the point of view of the weak.
Yeah.
We only have the point of view of the strong. So you look at any text from anywhere written before like 1600, or maybe even 1800, and pretty much you only have the point of view of the strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are some exceptions. You know um, Once particular ideas of, oh, I don't know, humility as a strength, or
Hmm.
sorts of moral strengths start influencing the culture, then you sort of have at least some lip service being given to the weak. But for the most part, even in those accounts, it's the strong that are making the accounts, right?
Yeah.
So but in if you ever read, for instance, the Odyssey and the Iliad by Homer,
Mm. Oh yeah.
um,
Mm.
there the value system is a lot different. What's taken to be virtues is quite different from, in say, either Christianity or post Enlightenment
Mm.
literature or whatever. I mean, sort of complicated to get into the whole worldview that Homer paints in those works. But basically, what is taken to be good
Mm.
is when someone is able to be the most excellent example of what they are. So, what that means, and there are a few different things that it could mean to say what the person is, and usually what the person is will change depending on the aspect of the god they're in contact with.
Mm.
So, for instance, sometimes Athena will come and put the person in a mood, and that mood will usually have something to do with justice or, um, sort of righteous indignation, righteous anger. But then maybe some other god will come and put the character in a different mood. And very often, each character will have a main god that they sort of associate with. And the idea is that their personality is understood as being attuned to the aspect of a certain god.
Mm.
Okay, so, but in any case, what it meant to be good was just that, to be attuned to this sort of aspect of a god. And so, for
Mm.
instance, Helen of Troy, that character in the Iliad and the
Uh, no,
Helen of Troy. Do you know about the Trojan War?
no,
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's
yeah.
probably good to like read the Wikipedia article about the Odyssey and the
Uh-huh.
Iliad. Um, okay, so basically, this is sort of an aside, but it's important to understand. Helen of Troy is the most beautiful, vivacious woman in, you know, existence. She's like the best, and it's because she's under the aspect of Aphrodite.
Okay.
And so she is married to this guy named Menelaus.
Mm.
Menelaus is a king. I think he's a king of Attica. I don't remember actually where his kingdom is, but in any case, he's this king of this important area. And then some Trojans come and visit, and in particular, the Trojan prince Paris. His name is Paris. He comes and he's so enraptured with Helen because she's the most beautiful thing that exists that they fall in love, and she runs off with Paris to Troy.
Mm.
Okay, so, and you have to understand a little bit about Greek customs at this time. So the number one duty, the number one moral duty for any Greek nobility was to show hospitality to
Mm.
guests. But the guests also had to be grateful for the hospitality of their hosts.
Okay.
And Paris, because he stole Menelaus's woman, was
Mm-hmm.
not being adequately respectful to the hospitality, and so they go to war.
Uh,
Now, we would think that what Helen did was kind of morally bad. She leaves her husband and children. She leaves, her country. She's the queen, right?
yeah.
She leaves them all in the lurch to run off with some guy that she just met.
Mm-hmm.
So we think that that is certainly bad judgment and probably kind of immoral, right?
Yeah.
Well, until Donald Trump became president, that was the sort of thing that would end political careers. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything's possible now.
Yeah.
Maybe now we're moving more towards a Homeric way of thinking about morality. But in any case, Homer doesn't say that what she does is bad. In fact, he praises her.
Mm.
Praises her as being the most excellent, most beautiful woman of Troy who does what she does because that's the most excellent. What it means to be fully in Aphrodite's mood is to follow, one, to be as beautiful as possible, and two, to follow, I guess, like the logic of your beauty and your drive for sensuous pleasure.
Mm.
That's and so, like, if you're so beautiful that every man wants to be with you, including multiple kings, multiple royalty and so on, then there's a way of understanding what it would mean to be excellent, not in a moral sense, the way
Mm-hmm.
that we mean it, but excellent because she's so beautiful that she has opportunities that nobody else has, and she follows those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it
Mm-hmm.
means to be excellent on this.
Mm-hmm.
But notice that there's not a difference between Helen, the person or the moral agent, and what she does. What she does, being really beautiful, sensuous, following her pleasure, is who she is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to the fact that she does follow these, does follow pleasure, does act in this way,
Yeah.
she's so much this person because she's so, in some sense, extreme
Mm.
in performing this sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say that the activity is, we would think of it morally as kind of extreme activity, running off with some guy you just met and leaving your country, your children, your family,
Yeah.
etc. But that extremeness is a way of understanding sort of how detailed of a person she is.
Right.
Right? That there's something very detailed versus someone who maybe doesn't have those opportunities, or when presented with the possibility of following the call to pleasure, for whatever reason, fails to do that.
Mm.
That's not excellent. What is excellent is fully manifesting the sort of core identity of who you are, but the core identity is how attuned you are to the mood that the God puts you in.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really important because what he's saying, and this syncs up with this idea of master morality.
Mm-hmm.
Another example of
Mm-hmm.
this, I won't be really detailed, but Achilles in the Iliad,
Mm-hmm.
his excellence is the fact that he's strong and nobody can kill him. He kills everybody else.
Yeah.
And there's even a moment where it's very complicated, but there's there's a nobleman from Troy who escapes. No, I'm sorry. There's a nobleman from Troy who loses a battle and is put into slavery and gets shipped off somewhere, but then he escapes. And Achilles is the one who defeated him the first time and put him into slavery.
Mm.
And then this guy comes back, and now Achilles is in a different mood because his friends have been killed, and so he's being influenced by a different god. But in any case, um, so this slave guy begs for mercy. Please don't kill me. You put me into slavery once before.
Mm.
And Achilles says, too late, things have changed, and kills him.
Oh.
And we would think of that as kind of immoral. He's killing a prisoner
Yeah.
of war or something, but
Yeah.
it's actually kind of excellent in a way because it's so much this figure, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
such an extreme manifestation of this sort of mood of, say,
Yeah.
physical aggression or something like that.
Yeah.
So the idea being here simply that what is good is just what you do.
Right.
There is there's no distinction between your activity and who you are. But in,
Mm-hmm.
say, Christian morality, there is.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have this idea that we decide to act in one way or another way. Right. Well, that's a sort of strange way to think about who we are, that we somehow have this identity that is separate from how it actually expresses itself in the world.
Yeah.
That's something that comes out of slave morality, but that's actually what's related to this grammatical thing. But in any case, it gives you sort of an idea of maybe a way of imagining what master, quote unquote, morality would be, which
Right.
is, so, often Nietzsche is referred to in terms of what is called virtue ethics.
Mm.
That's also what is often used to describe Aristotle's ethics, which basically means an ethics of excellence versus an ethics of duty or an ethics of equality of outcomes, which, say utilitarianism is based on equality of outcome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kant's ethics is based on the metaphysical duty to be moral. But
Yeah.
what Aristotle and Nietzsche think is when you ask, what should I do? What's the right thing to do? For Nietzsche and Aristotle, the answer is whatever makes you the most excellent manifestation of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that I think sort of covers like a lot of the stuff that he talks about in like number 9 and like especially number 10 about like how the noble mode of valuation versus like uh, the lower people and the way they evaluate things, and almost uh, like he says like nobility versus man of like resentment or resentment,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
how the noble just like lives in trust and openness, and
Mhm.
but then like the man of resentment is almost like cunning or like kind of like waits around the corner and
Yeah.
hides and kind of like
Okay,
waits for
so
the
that,
right.
yeah, there's one kind of important step in this historical myth, which is that you've got the masters, you've got the slaves, but within the masters, you have two classes, the warriors and the priests.
Yeah.
And the priests are elite, but they're not actually as strong as the
Mhm.
masters. And so they have to express their strength in a different way.
Yeah.
And the way you can think about this is just, I mean, there's an evolutionary way to describe this, which is, Homo sapiens is a pretty weak species physically.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, what makes Homo sapiens so powerful is intellect.
Yeah.
Right. And it's this idea that out of the out of this state of weakness, that weakness itself breeds intelligence.
Hmm.
Intelligence comes out of weakness.
Yeah, and I guess
You can
that's
think
the
of that
creative
in terms
part.
of evolution. You can think of that in terms of evolution.
Yeah.
What made it so powerful is that we could build tools and form societies and that kind of thing. That's what makes us powerful. In other words, the fact that we're intelligent. Well, that's what the sapiens of Homo sapiens means. Smart man is what it means, Homo sapiens.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but that intelligence in the evolutionary analysis of it is presumably only possible because that's the only way we were able to pass on our genes, because
Yeah.
it would have been wiped out by more powerful, you know, beasts of prey or whatever.
Yeah.
But the same basic analysis is going on here in this kind of mythic form, where it's the
Hmm.
priests who are the weak ones, but because of their weakness, they adapt to another sort of strength, which is intelligence.
Yeah.
Cleverness is what he describes it as. So this
Yeah.
is another one of these points where you can see that resentment isn't just totally a bad thing. It actually makes
Yeah.
humans interesting because that's where intelligence comes from.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, of course, what he says is that it's not just that intelligence is also a form of power. It's actually much more powerful and
Hmm.
destructive. It's actually much more destructive than
Right.
physical power, right?
Yeah.
It's a sort of destruction to it. And also, one of the things he says, which I think is interesting, is for the priests, even though they describe themselves as being the pure ones, the clean ones, the ones that are free of desire or this sort of thing,
Hmm.
it turns out that they're not really free of desire. They're not really free of the will to power.
Hmm.
It's that they sublimate them into more
More.
dangerous forms.
Yeah. 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 I guess
Right.
he does use the word dangerous.
Yeah, but it's this idea that, okay, I'm say a Buddhist monk or, some kind of priest or whatever. And so I say, look, I don't have any worldly desires.
Hmm.
And I tell myself that, maybe I even believe it, but subliminally in my subconscious, I'm sublimating it into an even more vicious form of aggression than is
Hmm.
possible in just mere physical aggression. And
Yeah.
what that means is, the idea that now my aggression turns into social structures wherein I get other people to believe that they're sinful.
Yeah.
And that makes me more powerful.
Hmm.
My sort of, another way of thinking about it is that my desire for power is now turned inward, so that now I have power, control over my physical desires, but that that itself is a sort of violence against myself. It's a violence
Mhm.
against my own nature to be a real human being in the world.
Yeah.
And what's worse
It,
about that is even it's not enough to stop at me. I tell other people, you also have to deny the world. You also have to deny life, and so on.
yeah. He interestingly brings up the word Brahmin
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, he does.
And
It's I think it's well, I came up with I put that in a different place than where he does it. I put it around section 5 is where I had it. But this idea,
right.
right? So this idea now of the strong also think of strength in terms of truth.
Hmm.
What it originally means is that there's a relationship between truth and being, truth and existence. Those who are more exist more fully can be
Hmm.
thought of to exist in a truer way.
Hmm.
In most historical, in most ancient philosophy, Indian philosophy or Greek philosophy, there's this connection between truth and existence,
You're right.
right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, with the idea of Brahma and the Brahmins and so on, I think
Hmm.
you see this sort of thing that
Yeah.
they're
Yeah. It
right.
was interesting because I mean I grew up in the Brahmin caste,
Mhm,
um, and just thinking about like the superiority and how like I mean so many cases that I can recall where you know just within my own family and like around me people who are Brahmin who are not as either like financially well off or just like strong or whatever it is
mhm,
compared to like other castes that we consider lower than
mhm,
us, and how we still have sort of like a strength over them in like social situations where uh, these people who are clearly better well off and stronger whatnot feel sort of meek around us,
mhm,
because they think they're not as spiritually well developed or whatnot. And within the Brahmin caste we like look at them and say like, oh, they're the meat eating kind of savages or whatever.
well, yeah. I mean, what you're describing, I mean, right. You're basically describing Nietzsche's analysis of these two
Yeah.
sections of society, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. I mean, like, you know, these Brahmins, they live in like really poor neighborhoods and just like a very like 1 bedroom house with like multiple kids and whatnot. And they spend their entire day like doing like rituals and whatnot, and that's how they make their money.
Mhm.
But um, at the same time, they just feel way more powerful than people who are clearly like better off in other ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I would
And
say that his analysis here of the split in the elite cat or the elite class is probably a lot closer to what you're describing than say in Judaism, where there is no
mhm,
warrior elite in Judaism. Judaism is
yeah,
all priestly,
yeah,
basically, you know.
yeah,
And so what you're describing is sort of interesting. These two approaches to what it means to be elite,
mhm,
right? There's the sort of physical strength or material wealth or that kind of thing. But there's this way of turning that into this sort of spiritual sense or something like
mhm,
that.
mhm,
He says a couple other kind of interesting things around 8, where he's talking about the crucifixion is something. I describe it as like a Trojan horse, but maybe you don't know what that means. You know what the Trojan horse is?
no,
Oh, that's an idiom in English. We use that pretty often. A Trojan horse,
uh,
like actually, a computer virus. Sometimes it's
oh,
called.
yeah, I know Trojans as virus, but
Yeah, well, it's because of the Trojan horse.
I see. Okay.
So the Trojan horse was one of the ways that Odysseus was able to capture Troy was that they were like, okay, so Odysseus and the Greeks were fighting against Troy, and they were so they come to Troy and they're like, look, we don't want to fight anymore. We give up. You guys are too strong. We can't win. And to show our humility, we're going to give you this gift. It's a gigantic
Mhm.
wooden horse. But and so then they push the horse into the city of Troy, but inside the horse are Greek soldiers, and they come out and they kill everybody in Troy.
Mm, mm,
So that's why it's
mm,
called a Trojan, because it looks like something good, but inside is a virus.
mm, mm.
And you can think of the crucifixion in Christianity the same way, that because Christians talk about the crucifixion as the supreme act of love of God,
Mhm.
because, God loves humanity so much that he's willing to die himself
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
cross. But it turns out that that's the outside of the Trojan horse, but the inside is this hate that hates reality, hates the world, hates the body, um, and it's something that comes out of resentment, right? This resentment that we aren't actually strong, so all we have to do is say, no, the world is bad, we're good.
yeah.
It's like that meme from The Simpsons of Principal Skinner, where he's thinking, he thinks logically, like there's people change the words at various times, but it's sort of like, am I the one who's wrong? And
Mhm.
then, and usually it's obviously yes, you're the one who's wrong. But then
Yeah,
he says to himself, no, it's the children who are wrong.
yeah,
I mean, it's the same kind of thing here with this resentment, where it's like,
yeah,
am I bad because I can't do what I want? I'm not strong. I'm dirty. It's like, no, it's them. They're the ones who are evil. And
yeah,
that's a sort of hatred. There's a sort of anger, sort of hatred that is totally impotent, because you can't actually do anything except imagine some afterlife where everything will be made, where everything will be justified, that there's going to be some
yeah,
justice in the afterlife. But in
yeah.
this world, all you can do is hate.
Right. Yeah. I guess like the lower order or the weaker ones need the other in order to justify their existence or what. But for like the powerful or like what Nietzsche says, they don't need this other entity to.
Yeah, he says conflicting things. But you're right that the first analysis, the surface level analysis, is that the masters are active. They just do what they want. Who cares what other, there is kind of sad maybe that other people can't do what they want, but we can do what we want, so
Mhm,
that's good. Those others are just kind of sad.
mhm.
And so it seems like they don't really care about the slaves or whatever. So they're active. They just do what they want, and that's active. And the slaves are reactive, because their value doesn't come from what they're doing. It comes from saying, no, those masters are bad.
Right.
Those masters are evil, and we're good.
Yeah.
But not
Yeah.
because not because there's anything actively good about us. We start by saying others are evil, therefore we're
Mhm.
good. Whereas the masters are, we're good, you know. So that's active. They don't really care
Mhm.
about this. But then it turns out at the end of this section that Nietzsche actually thinks that in master morality there is this hatred of the other as well.
Yeah.
Um, let's save that though.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time you have.
I have a student coming in at 10:45, so
Okay. Well, we should at least
yeah.
get through section 13, because that's where things get really interesting. Um, so section 13 is where he's talking about, he has this little example of lambs and birds of prey.
Hmm.
And, um, the lambs see the birds of prey as evil, and they hate the birds of prey, but the birds of prey love the lambs because they're so delicious. um, and then what he says here, I just have it paraphrased and summarized, so we don't have time to hunt through the
Yeah.
text for the exact quote, but basically what he's saying here is that free will, the idea of morality and free will, is based on a confusion of language. And he talks about this in
Mhm.
relationship to the subject,
Hmm.
the relationship of subject and predicate grammatically.
Yeah.
Is it clear what that means?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
The
Why don't you if it's clear, then tell me what it means and how's it related to science, the biases of contemporary physical sciences, um, say morality, the ideas of freedom, ideas of denying life, denying the world.
so yeah, I guess like subject and predicate, subjects like uh included in the predicate.
No, that's not what it means.
Oh.
Well, like a subject predicate construction is where you have A is B, for instance.
Mm,
The subject term there is A. There's a
right.
copula connecting it to its predicate, and the predicate is B. So if I say, I don't know, like I'm a professor or something, Huck Hodge is a professor. Huck Hodge is a subject,
Mhm.
and the predicate professor is placed on the subject. Grammatically, what's happening is you have some structure that is taken to be logically prior, and that's the subject. The subject just means it's thrown under. It's that which is under the predicate, which is placed on top. Way to think about this is in terms of verbs. It's even better than just straight up adjectival predication. If I say, Sandesh is eating, okay, would it make any sense to talk about eating without somebody doing the eating? It would?
No, it wouldn't.
It would not. But it would make sense just to talk about Sandesh. You don't have to say eating. So then we have the sense that, the subject of that sentence, Sandesh, is independent of the activity eating. And that's just a grammatical construction. There is no metaphysical import to that at all. It's just, that's how these, these animals, human beings, have put words together in order to refer to the world. Then what Nietzsche thinks, though, is that you go from that, or the slaves at least go from that, to a sort of confusion wherein they think that the subject somehow now has this metaphysical existence separate from the things that are predicated of it. Like, and you can see the weirdness in that if I say, this thing is a cup. And then you say, and now I ask you, okay, give me an analysis, not of the cup part of that sentence, but of the thing part of this sentence. What this thing is a cup, it's kind of a weird way to see the world, right? Because what I have is just a cup. I don't have a thing and a cup.
Yeah.
Or to the extent that this cup, the cupness is predicated of a thing, what does it even mean to say that the thing exists outside of its predicates? Right? I mean, predicates are what make it the thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But grammatically, we have this idea that the thingness of that sentence is separate from the fact that it's a cup, its attribute. Just like the thingness of you, Sandish, is separate from whatever verb, eating, running, doing whatever.
Yeah.
Right. But when I talk about a thing that is separate from its predicates, now I have this weird sort of thing where I am thinking of an entity, something that exists
Outside of, yeah.
outside, without any material coordinates, basically. Right.
Yeah.
And also in terms of verbs, now I have this idea that there's a thing that is distinct from what it does. Remember with Homer, I was saying what makes somebody excellent was that they express themselves in their activity to an extreme degree. That's who they are. What they do is who they are. But in Christianity, you mistake the subject for some sort of metaphysical self.
So that's the predicate.
And the predicate is what you do. Kill, steal, or be moral. Right. And from this, Nietzsche thinks you get this confusion wherein the subject now can choose which of its predicates it wants to perform. But that's just a confusion of grammar, he thinks.
Yeah.
It just so happens that, grammar is structured this way, but we shouldn't take any metaphysical meanings from that. But what he thinks is that this is not only something that is true of, say, Christian morality, Kantian morality. He also thinks it's a problem, it's a problematic assumption in the physical sciences too. Because he specifically talks about atoms. I'll ask you, I know it's 10:45, maybe.
Oh yeah, I should go give a test to the student.
Okay.
Yeah. But
well, yeah, okay. Can you give the test? Do you have to proctor the test?
Yeah, they're taking it on Zoom.
Are they in your waiting room?
No, I need to like still like start the
Oh,
meeting
you
because
need
I'm
to
on this
start.
meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this is a really important point. Basically, what Nietzsche thinks is that science as we know it today is based in a sort of confusion that comes out of Christian morality, that comes out of a confusion of grammar.
Mm.
And the idea basically has to do with the status of theoretical entities. But I'll let you think about that for a while.
What was that science? It was like
The
sort of a confusion, right?
status of theoretical entities in science.
Okay.
Um,
And that's a sort of a confused. He's saying it's sort of confused.
it's a confusion of grammar that shares its structure with the moral agent in Christianity.
About it.
But I guess we'll save that till next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.